I've never seen so many people hate something when they don't even know what it is. Welcome to the Rob Lett Show. I'm your host, Rob Lett. The real reason Democrats hate capitalism. That's the focus of today's podcast. We've got a lot to unpack here today. Today we're going to discuss the most villainized economic system, the reason why, when Marxists push back what capitalism really is, and finally, why you should love capitalism. But before we get started, I'd like you to go ahead and do a few things. First of all, like this video, subscribe to it. If you're on YouTube, to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a bell. That's a notifications bell. Click it, and it'll notify you the next time we release a new show. If you're on Rumble, though, to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a share button. Click it, and it'll share this video with a friend of yours who should have been here with us today. Go ahead and do all of those things that apply right now. Mark Twain once said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." Never a truer statement has been said about capitalism. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen people so sure, so passionate about something that they're absolutely clueless about. Tons of people villainize capitalism, even conservatives accidentally, because they just don't understand what capitalism really is. Here are just a few things that I've heard about capitalism.
All right, blasting capitalism, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is taking her attacks one step further. Take a listen to this.
The most important thing is the concentration of capital, and it means that we seek and prioritize profit and the accumulation of money above all else, and we seek it at any human and environmental cost. That is what that means. And to me, that ideology is not sustainable and cannot be redeemed. What we are reckoning with are the consequences of putting profit above everything else in society.
But there are differences between Elizabeth and myself. Elizabeth, I think, as you know, has said that she is a capitalist through her bones. I'm not. I think the situation today that we face in this country of the greed and the corruption that is existing in Washington, that is existing at the corporate elite level, where you have massive amounts of price fixing going on in the drug companies, where we're the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people, where we have right now, as we speak, in the fossil fuel industry, you got companies making billions of dollars a year in profit, doing what? Oh, by the way, they're destroying the planet, all right? And I think business as usual and doing it the old-fashioned way is not good enough. It's not regulation now. What we need is, in fact, I don't want to get people too nervous, we need a political revolution. I am, I believe, the only candidate who's going to say to the ruling class of this country, the corporate elite, enough with your greed and with your corruption. We need real change in this country.
So you don't think that's what Elizabeth Warren is
saying?
Well,
look, Elizabeth is a friend of mine. She will speak for herself. I've just told you what I view.
But you've said there are differences, and you just mentioned a label.
Well, it's not a label. I mean, Elizabeth considers herself, if I got the quote correctly, to be a capitalist to her bones. I don't. And the reason I am not is because I will not tolerate for 1 second the kind of greed and corruption and income and wealth inequality and so much suffering that is going on in this country today, which is unnecessary.
American economic greatness has never trickled down from the top. It grows from a rising, thriving middle class and opportunity for working people. That's what makes us different.
Have you ever caught yourself saying any one of these things? In almost every movie, television show, or cartoon, if there is an evil man, he's almost undoubtedly an evil rich man. I mean, how often do you see a movie where the major villain was an evil poor man? Not very often. The Democrat Party and mainstream media has got everyone jaded on their opinions about capitalism, and it's obvious to see why. There are a number of reasons why capitalism is so misunderstood, and all of the reasons are because of things people assume about capitalism.
You should never assume, because when you assume, you make an ass of you and me.
The first assumption people make about capitalism is they assume capitalism is money. It is not. Now make a note of what I just said. Push it to the side somewhere because this one takes a little time to explain. We'll come back to this, but no, capitalism is not money. The second assumption is based off of the first assumption. It assumes that if someone is making a lot of money, then that somehow means that there's less money for you, making it harder for you to survive. This is called the zero-sum game principle, which means my success somehow equals your failure. This isn't true, by the way. The zero-sum game theory comes from the assumption that money is like a pie. People even incorrectly use that expression, saying they want their piece of the pie. The problem with this assumption is a pie only has a certain number of slices, right? So if someone takes one, you can't help but feel as though you're getting the leftovers, making many people feel resentful. The third assumption is really a lie based off a previous assumption. Do you see how these assumptions are piling up, by the way? It comes from a made-up economic theory called trickle-down economics. I say made-up economic theory because no one has ever produced the economist who provided the research for trickle-down economics. Do you know why? Because no economist ever exists that coined that phrase. It's a made-up phrase designed to produce envy in people and to make them feel beneath the wealthy. So-called trickle-down economics proposes that if you let the wealthy keep most of their money without taxing them much, then the wealthy will create businesses, and then the wealth will trickle down to all the rest of us. Other than the fact trickle-down economics is a made-up phrase, the other reason this is a fallacy is because it isn't an accurate depiction of how businesses work. Many businesses work the exact opposite of what's depicted in the so-called trickle-down theory. Inc. magazine wrote an article on 5 successful companies that didn't make $1 for 5 years. FedEx, Amazon, CNN, ESPN, and Tesla are just a few examples of companies that ran for years without making a profit. Does this mean the employees weren't paid? Of course not. Does this mean the rent wasn't being paid in the building they were in? Of course not. Does this mean the employees operated with no supplies and no tools? No, no, and no. Of course not. The owner of the business had to pay for the supplies, for the building, for the employees, and in many instances, the owner of the business was the last to be paid. In some cases, they weren't paid for years. That is not trickle down, and we'll prove it later on. The fourth and most obvious reason people are confused about capitalism is just plain envy. Whenever we see someone who appears to have more than we have, we dream up all kinds of reasons as to why that must be the case. They stole it, it's their skin color, it's their gender, it's their religious affiliation. You name it and we'll come up with something negative to say about capitalism and how people have come to succeed in society. So obviously, if you've got so many people criticizing capitalism, you think they'd propose something better, right? But they haven't. Every once in a while you get these Marxists who oppose capitalism so vehemently, they decide to try and show us all how it should be done. The first case study comes from Ben & Jerry's. Have you ever had Ben & Jerry's? They're an ice cream company that was founded in 1978 by Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield. Their product is good. Their policies, not so good. I got this right off their website. Capitalism and the wealth it produces do not create opportunity for everyone equally. We recognize that the gap between the rich and the poor is wider than at any time since the 1920s. Founders thought the pay ratio of most CEOs to their employees were immoral. In typical leftist fashion, since capitalism was bad, they set out to build a better business model to operate their company under. Ben & Jerry's vowed their company would cap CEO's salary at a 5-to-1 ratio, meaning the CEO could only earn 5 times whatever their lowest paid employee was earning. Ben & Jerry's CEO at one point earned as little as $81,000 annually. If the CEO received a raise, their 5-to-1 rule required that the lowest paid employee also received a raise to stay within the ratio. Well, surprise, surprise, Ben & Jerry's abandoned that rule in 1994 when the company couldn't find a CEO to replace Ben Cohen upon his retirement. Their 5-to-1 rule went to 7-to-1, raising the CEO's pay to $150,000. By the year 2000, CEO pay rose to 17-to-1, nearly $505,000, not including stock options. At that point, Ben & Jerry's was bought out by Unilever, and the company stopped disclosing details about the CEO's pay, and the board of directors no longer discloses any information about compensation either. According to CBS News, the compensation of Ben & Jerry's current CEO is now a secret. That's less disclosure than the more successful company that acquired Ben & Jerry's in the first place. Gee, I wonder why. Funny how things were so open and transparent when they wanted to virtual signal to the world how so-called fair and righteous they were. Now that they realize they were dead wrong about how the real world works, they've suddenly become very quiet and private. Ben & Jerry's is more private than the companies that were capitalists to begin with. But Ben & Jerry's is not alone. In June of 2019, presidential candidate Bernie Sanders attended Walmart's annual shareholders meeting. Why was he attending the meeting, you ask? He was attending to chastise Walmart on the moral culpability of the low wages they were paying to their employees. Bernie Sanders talked about Walmart being wealthy, yet paying their employees starvation wages. Bernie Sanders toured the entire country telling the entire nation that $15 an hour was the least companies should pay their employees. Can you guess what happened next? Some of you know. Guess who got busted paying his campaign staffers less than $15 an hour? You guessed it, Bernie Sanders, along with many other Democrats, by the way. It's so similar to the Ben & Jerry's case where he started out criticizing the evil capitalist, implying that he somehow represented the moral high road. I'll at least give Ben & Jerry credit in one regard. They at least had the credibility of trying to implement what they were preaching when the founder was the CEO. But Bernie Sanders had zero credibility. He effectively toured the nation misleading the entire general public until his own employees called him out on it. That's the second case study. The third case study happened just recently. In March of 2022, a little coffee shop called the Anarchist Cafe opened up in Toronto, Canada. A little over a year later, that same coffee shop was closing.
Grand opening, grand closing.
Why did the coffee shop close, you ask? Well, how much time you got? Do we start with its founder, Gabriel Sims Fewer, the man with a hyphenated last name? Do we start with the fact that Gabriel named his coffee shop the Anarchist Cafe when he doesn't clearly know what anarchy is? Or do we start with Gabriel's philosophy for running his coffee shop? Let's be nice and start there, because that's the only thing that matters, right? According to Fortune magazine and the New York Post, Gabriel's business philosophy was pay what you can. Do you see a problem with this business philosophy? A lot of socialists don't. Imagine your mortgage company saying your mortgage payment is $1,500 a month, but hey, pay what you can. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to predict what the outcome is going to be now, do you? If mortgage companies operated that way, there wouldn't be any mortgage companies in existence for you to borrow from. How did the coffee shop expect to exist on a pay-what-you-can model, you ask? With the same policies of the Democrat Party, of course. Higher-priced drinks help to subsidize their shop, according to their website. Does this sound familiar?
We're going to extend the Medicare Trust Fund at least 2 decades, because that's going to be the next argument. How do we keep it solvent, right? Well, we'll not raise tax on anyone making under 400 grand, but we'll pay for it the way we talked about by making sure that the wealthy and big corporations pay their fair share.
The rich are always the ones who are going to pay for everything when it comes to socialism, while simultaneously despising the rich, relying on the people you persecute. Now, what could go wrong? So in just these 3 case studies alone, we've seen an interesting pattern. With Ben & Jerry's, we saw the CEO holding out a capitalism alternative, only later to have to abandon that alternative and return back to capitalism. With the Anarchist Cafe, we see yet another socialist CEO proposing a capitalist alternative, yet in his case, he wasn't wise enough to abandon his socialist principles, and therefore he's going out of business. Then in Bernie Sanders' case, you have someone who already knows capitalism works better, but he doesn't have the heart to tell that to his followers. He secretly uses capitalism to grow his wealth while simultaneously selling the dream of socialism to the uneducated masses. Look at all 3 of these case studies. Every one of them came to the exact same conclusion in 3 different ways, that there's no economic system on the planet better than capitalism. Every place socialism is tried, it fails. But they wouldn't have to embarrass themselves if they would just occasionally read something that they disagree with. Then they learn the real reason they've never found any economic system better than capitalism. In order for you to understand this free market system called capitalism, you'll have to understand a little bit about the history of money. I hope everyone understands we didn't always have this thing called money. Before we had money, we had this system of getting things that we needed and wanted called bartering. Bartering was and is a system of exchanging what you have for what you want. For instance, I have an old MacBook. Remember the one with the DVD player on the side? I still have it. I just don't use it. I already have a new MacBook, and so does my wife. The only reason I keep the old one around is because occasionally a movie comes out that I want to own. So rather than streaming it or having the file take up additional space on my computer, I'd rather just play it on my old Mac. Other than that, the laptop doesn't really have a lot of value to me. But somewhere in the universe is a person who would love to own that MacBook, and they probably have something that is equally not a big deal to them, but is a big deal to me. If you ask them, they'd probably love to have my laptop, and I would probably give them my laptop in exchange for their widget. If we made that transaction, do you see what just happened? Both of us got exactly what we wanted. That is free market capitalism. It's called free market capitalism because no one forced me to take his widget, and no one persuaded or influenced him to take my laptop. We're both genuinely happy. Another key ingredient about capitalism that gets overlooked because it's implied is the transaction also has to be free of any fraud. If the guy gave me his widget and I gave him my laptop, but the laptop didn't have a hard drive in it, that is not capitalism. He might have never made that transaction had he known that. Do you understand this? So the complete definition of capitalism is it's a system of voluntary exchange minus any fraud or coercion. So how did money get mixed up into this? Money got mixed up into this because sooner or later two parties would get together for a voluntary exchange, but one of the parties wouldn't have something of value for the other party. For example, let's say that I'm a farmer and you have something that I consider to be valuable. Well, obviously you have something of value, but in order to complete this transaction, I must also have something that you deem to be valuable. If I tell you, okay, I have these cows that you can have, there's a really good chance that you're going to tell me, Rob, I don't really need a cow, don't have room for a cow. You get the picture. We can't do business. Something had to be recognized as a universal store of value. It may be hard for you to imagine, but many things have served as money over our history. It all depends on where you were geographically. In some areas, feathers were used as money, certain stones. Two items that were universally recognized as having value were gold and silver. I'm condensing the story for time purposes, but at some point gold and silver got a little too heavy to carry, a little too dangerous to carry, so these little receipts were more convenient. These little receipts were meant to prove you actually had gold or silver somewhere in reserve. That's how the word reserve came to be affiliated with our money. One year I asked my son what he wanted for Christmas, and he said, Dad, I really just want some money. What he was really saying is, give me something that has universal value, and I'll be able to exchange that for whatever I want. Does that make sense? Money just increases the flow and ease of transactions so that we're not stuck trying to barter for things that we don't want or need. Now, why did I go through this lengthy explanation of what capitalism is? Because you need to know the history of it so you can clearly understand why nobody can ever duplicate capitalism. Nobody can ever duplicate it because capitalism represents the individual vote of everyone. Think of money like a ballot. If you and I had the exact same amount of money and we both walked into a store, the odds are great that you and I will both come out with very different things, because you're going to come out with things that you wanted and needed, and I'll come out with things that I wanted and needed. Those items are going to be very different because you and I are very different, but we both get to vote on the things that we hold valuable. Now, I can hear you saying, wait a minute, Rob, one of the first assumptions you addressed about capitalism was the fact that capitalism is not money. Now you're trying to explain all of the things that you can do with money. Didn't you just contradict yourself? No, I did not contradict myself. This is why I slowly walked you through money's history so you could understand that capitalism came first. Money came later. Money is just an overlay. It's an illusion that obfuscates what capitalism really is. Don't worry. I'm almost there. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but so far we've only been discussing what capitalism is. It's only right that we have a small discussion on what capitalism is not. If you walk around with the belief that capitalism is any time someone gets money, there's a fundamental problem with that. Because if that's your definition, then do you consider robbery to be capitalism? I mean, money exchanged hands, didn't it? I think you're smart enough to realize that is not capitalism. It violates the very first sentence I gave you earlier. Capitalism is a voluntary exchange. When someone robs you, you obviously didn't volunteer for that, so that's not capitalism. You also didn't volunteer to be defrauded. So when you have people like Bernie Madoff, who pulled off one of the biggest financial scams in U.S. history, defrauding some investors of some $65 billion, you should also know that this is not capitalism. All theft doesn't happen at the barrel of a gun. A lot of theft occurs because of methods that don't involve a weapon at all. But I don't want to give you the impression that all of these instances are cut and dried, because some of them can be pretty complex. For instance, a lot of conservatives complain about Facebook and their so-called fact checkers who are always censoring our posts. But if you recall, according to Mark Zuckerberg, these were not Facebook policies. These were policies instituted when the FBI leaned on Facebook, dictating to them how they should run their business.
Just this afternoon, a federal judge barred parts of the administration from contacting social media platforms about online content. Now, the ruling came in response to a lawsuit brought by Republican-led states alleging that the White House went too far in its efforts to curb content that challenged vaccines or threatened elections. The judge said certain departments should not reach out to companies like Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram for, quote, the purpose of urging, encouraging, pressuring or inducing any manner the removal, the deletion, the suppression, or the reduction of content containing protected free speech.
People incorrectly call this an example of capitalism, but actually, this is fascism. Many people toss around words they don't know how to define. This isn't capitalism because remember the other part of that definition, that capitalism is a system of voluntary exchange minus any fraud and or coercion. In this case, the government is trying to coerce, dare I say, intimidate a private business to change its policies, and yet capitalism gets all the blame for it. But just to show you I'm not here to paint only a rosy picture of capitalism, I'll give you an example of something that is capitalism, and a lot of people complain about it. When you hear these musicians who sign music deals where they end up getting the short end of the stick, you might expect me to rush in and say, oh, that's not capitalism. But you'd be wrong. More often than not, that is capitalism. Because if the musicians signed an agreement, that means they were fully made aware of the terms. That is a voluntary transaction. The fact that they didn't educate themselves is not the fault of capitalism. It's your responsibility to educate yourself when you don't understand something. Hire an attorney if you need to. So you've learned what people have said about capitalism. You've learned what people have proposed instead of capitalism. You've learned what capitalism is and what capitalism is not. You might be thinking to yourself, capitalism doesn't sound that bad to me, so why do Democrats hate capitalism so much? You didn't think I'd forget, did you? Democrats will never admit to this, but the real reason Democrats hate capitalism is all because of one word: independence. I was on a friend of mine's show recently, and she asked me to clarify the difference between leftists and conservatives. I listed several things, but the most important of which is the left are defined by their community, hence the term communists. They're more concerned with what the collective group wants. Conservatives are defined by individualism, because there can't be a group without there first being an individual, right? I needed to state this again so you can understand the real reason why Democrats hate capitalism. The real reason Democrats hate capitalism is because capitalism is the economic expression of individuality, which Democrats are fundamentally opposed to. Earlier we said money is like a ballot. Give two people $1 each, and each will come home with exactly what they wanted. It doesn't matter how large your family is. I don't care if you got 13 kids. If you gave each one of those kids $1, each would come home with exactly what they wanted. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. I don't care how well you know your children. Even you can't predict what they'll want all the time, but they will through capitalism. Think about elections. If you live in California and you're a Republican, you probably feel like your vote is wasted because your state is blue. But if you live in Indiana and you're a Democrat, you probably feel like your vote is wasted because your state is red. But with capitalism, you got what you wanted every time. And Democrats don't like that. You want proof? Do you remember when Barack Obama was proposing Obamacare? Publicly, he told you this.
If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor, period. If you like your health care plan, you will be able to keep your health care plan, period.
But behind the scenes, Democrats worked to cancel the individual insurance policies you had, and Obama had to publicly apologize about the effects of his policies.
With respect to the pledge I made that if you like your plan, you can keep it. I think, and I've said in interviews, that there is no doubt that the way I put that forward unequivocally ended up not being accurate.
Democrats didn't want you to be an individual about this. They had predetermined that government insurance is what was best for you, and they were forcing you to take it. I see you're not convinced, though, so let me give you another example. Remember when Michael Bloomberg banned the big gulp drinks in New York? He believed it was too much for you to drink, and it wasn't healthy. So they just made the decision for you. Then there was the time California Governor Gavin Newsom was moving to ban gasoline vehicles by the year 2035. What made the governor think it was fine to get rid of your vehicle? Did he ask you? No, because dictators don't ask. New York was also the first state to ban gas stoves, by the way. Are you seeing my point? Capitalism is a vote for what you want. Socialism is submission to what they want. The left demands altruism. They demand that you sacrifice your individuality for the sake of the group. This is one of the reasons why Trump is the most hated president by the left, because he's the walking, living, breathing embodiment of unapologetic capitalism. Are you expecting Trump to say something nice when he's upset with you? Don't count on it. He'll let you know exactly where he stands.
Why you held on to those documents when you knew the federal government was seeking them and then had given you a subpoena to return them?
Are you ready? Are you ready? Can I talk?
Yeah, what's the
mind?
answer?
Do you mind?
I would like for you to answer the question.
Okay, it's very simple to answer.
That's why I asked it.
It's very simple to, you're a nasty person, I'll tell you.
Are you expecting Trump to apologize for being wealthy? Don't count on that either.
Maybe he's not worth 10 billion. I think he's only worth 7. I'm actually worth more than 10, but you know that's...
He's not really big on conforming to what you think. After all, he's built an entire career standing out from the crowd. But I know, someone's always trying to claim that capitalism is greedy. The problem is no one can ever seem to define what greed is.
What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy.
Truth be told, you should love capitalism. Capitalism is exciting. Nearly everything that has made or will make your world a better place is due to free market capitalism. It doesn't matter if you're the entrepreneur, the employee, or the customer. If you're the customer, you should love capitalism because it's competition that makes businesses either produce a product that's cheaper or build a product that's better. If you're an employee, you should love capitalism because if you ever question your worth, you can always test the market for the current skills you have. And my favorite of all time, that's why I saved it for last. If you're an entrepreneur, you should love capitalism because capitalism is the great equalizer. You can be poor right now, but in America, it doesn't mean you have to stay that way. Earlier, we said money is like a ballot, but here's an even deeper thought for you entrepreneur types, because money is also an idea. This might make some people mad at me, but if you don't like where you are financially, it's a direct reflection of the ideas you've had up until this point. Get around people who have better ideas. When you implement them, your life will improve. I don't know how old you are, but I want to take you down memory lane really quick. If you have a millennial in a household, you might want to pause this right now, go get them, and bring them back. I'll wait. Okay, you ready? When I was a kid, telephones were actually plugged into the wall. That's where the phrase landline comes from for you youngins out there. Your phone was actually tied to the building. In addition to the cord that was plugged into the wall, there was another cord that ran from the base of the phone all the way to the receiver in your hand. That cord was pretty short. You couldn't move too far away from the phone unless you bought an extra long cord. Then you could move a little bit more freely throughout your house. But the cords had a downside. They'd get tangled up, and every once in a while you'd have to untangle them so that you can move again. When you made a phone call, it took forever because you had to put your finger in the hole of each one of these numbers, then pull that number all the way back to this metal piece on your phone. So in order for you to dial 9, you had to put your finger in the hole that said 9, then pull that 9 all the way back to the metal piece on the phone, then let it go and wait for your phone to go. And that was just to dial one number. Don't forget you got to dial 7 of them. And don't let it be a long distance number. Then you got to dial 10 of them. It may have even been 11. I think you had to dial 1 first. Speaking of long distance, you couldn't call anybody in the next state without being charged extra. And when I say extra, I don't mean a flat fee. I mean you were charged for how long you were on the phone. It was so expensive that sometimes parents would jump in the middle of your phone call, because parents could do that back then, and they would tell you to get off the phone because you're talking too much. Those were the good old days. Some of you millennials are like, what the heck? The reason I walked you through all of that is to show you just how much we take capitalism for granted. Thanks to capitalism, you don't have to do a single thing I just described anymore. You're not plugged into the wall. You don't have any cords to untangle. You can call anybody in any state without being home, and you're not even being charged by the minute anymore. Nobody can jump in on your phone line, and you can do it all just by holding down one button and saying, call mama. Don't front, you love capitalism. If you had thought of just one of these ideas from back in the day, it would have made you a lot of money, and that's just one example from the telecom industry. I see people making money in so many different ways in America. If you're not excited, you're not paying attention. When I was a kid, you had to be a celebrity in order to be on television. You know what I mean? You had to be an actor, singer, athlete, author, something like that. But nowadays, Kim Kardashian is a household name, and she's not any one of those things. All she did was, well, you know what she did. You get my point, though. Some of you are watching me on television right now, and I'm not an actor. Capitalism is awesome. Remember when we used to have to call a cab? Remember when we didn't know how far away the cab driver was? Remember when restaurants actually had to have delivery drivers in order to deliver food to you? Remember when the only cars you could rent was whatever the car rental company provided to you? You gotta be kidding me. Capitalism makes your world a better place. There's a guy out there who started this business called the Line Guys. Do you know what they do? Have you ever wanted to buy a ticket to a concert or something, but you had to stand in a long line to do it? Well, that's what they do. They send a guy to stand in line so you don't have to. And guess what happened as soon as other entrepreneurs realized people would pay for this service? They started their own business called Line Dudes. Man, you're crazy if you hate capitalism. It's only limited by your imagination. It's what makes America great. There are opportunities all around you just waiting to be discovered. We had a lot to unpack in this episode. In this episode, we covered the most villainized economic system. We discussed how capitalism is the most villainized economic system in the world. And we discussed how there are a lot of stereotypes about capitalism, but they're not accurate. The reasons why. We also discussed the reasons why there are so many misconceptions about capitalism. We discussed the assumption that capitalism is money, and we explained why that wasn't true because capitalism existed before there was money. We discussed the popular theory that capitalism is like a piece of pie. We explained why that's not true either. Capitalism isn't like some finite piece of pie. It's more like a potluck where everyone's bringing something to the table and you never know what they're going to bring. We discussed how the so-called trickle-down theory isn't even a real economic theory. We discussed why it isn't real by using examples of big businesses that didn't pay people by trickling down, but paying people from the bottom up, so to speak. And we couldn't leave out the most obvious reason why people vilify capitalism just because of plain envy, because somebody has something that they don't have, when Marxists push back. We talked about the times when Marxists pushed back and tried to show us all how socialism would work better than capitalism and what a miserable failure it was. We discussed how Ben and Jerry's tried and they failed. How Bernie Sanders tried to mislead people into believing he was practicing socialism when he wasn't, because he knew socialism wouldn't work. We discussed how a little communist coffee shop went out of business after just a little over a year, trying to survive on socialist principles. I do have an update though. In fairness, I have to tell you that by the time I completed this show, the little communist cafe put out a plea for other communists to give them money. So as of this episode, technically they're still in business. It doesn't change anything I said though. All it proves is that communists never learn. They're willing to throw money after a failing business model despite all of the evidence that is losing money. Sooner or later, the people donating will get tired of pouring money into a failing business. They'll pull out, and it'll only delay the inevitable. It'll fail just like socialism always does. What capitalism really is. We discussed what capitalism is and what capitalism is not. We discussed how free market capitalism is an economic system of voluntary exchange minus fraud or coercion. And that if there's anything interfering with the process of this being voluntary, that you technically can't blame that on capitalism. Oh, I almost forgot to prove to you why businesses don't operate on this so-called trickle-down economics. There are a lot of business reality shows on television, but do you know one of my favorite shows to watch? Have you ever seen this show called The Profit? I like The Profit because a lot of these shows, they sugarcoat the life of an entrepreneur. But The Profit shows something that most of you need to see.
I originally did the build out, put my life savings in here.
How much have you put in?
Around $250,000.
So, is the restaurant making money?
No.
How much are you losing a month?
Currently in $5,000-6,000 a month.
When you don't have the money to pay the bills and you have to fight with your partners to pay the bills, it becomes an issue.
When's the last time that you guys took everything out of this place and cleaned it?
We clean every day.
You're telling me that everything's clean there every day?
Yeah.
Guys, this isn't clean. I mean, look down here. That's not clean. Dude, that's disgusting. I'm frustrated because what I signed up for wasn't this. I want you to take that off.
We set the standard?
Yeah, you don't set any standard. Get the razor, take that off. I don't want that standard.
I know it's only one clip, but what do you need to see exactly? You need to see the number of times they show the owner who lives in their mother's basement when all of the employees think they're rich. You need to see the number of times they show just how close the business is to shutting their doors when all of the employees think everything is just fine. You need to see the number of times all the employees think the owner has got it made when the owner is stressed beyond belief from all of the debt they're in. The guy you just saw said he sunk his life savings, $250,000 into a restaurant. He runs it with several partners and they were still losing $5,000 to $6,000 per month. What's my point? My point is that trickle-down economics is not how most businesses work. In many businesses, the owner is putting it all on the line in hopes that their business will work. As a result, they end up paying almost everybody except themselves. In other words, there's far more evidence showing that business owners are hoping that the money will trickle up to them than the other way around. You should love capitalism. The last thing we covered is why you should love capitalism. You should love capitalism because no matter who you are, there's no economic system on the planet that can lift you out of poverty and give everyone exactly what they want more effectively than capitalism. If you're a customer, it helps you find the best product available at the best price. If you're an employee, it helps you find the best pay for your skill set. If you're a business owner, not only does it give you a way to test all of your ideas, but it gives you the most effective way to communicate those ideas to the general public. Are you uneducated? You better embrace capitalism because capitalism is how you're going to level the playing field. Are you oppressed in any way, shape, form, or fashion? You'd better embrace capitalism because capitalism is how you're going to get out of your oppression. Are you hated for some reason? You'd better embrace capitalism because capitalism is the reason why your enemy's feelings won't matter. Don't believe anything I just said? Then explain to me how Floyd Mayweather can make $275 million for one fight, but he can't even read. Answer: capitalism. Explain to me why black people are determined to sell you on the idea that we've been systematically discriminated against, yet in the same breath, Tyler Perry owns the largest movie production studio in the country. It's larger than Warner Brothers, Disney, and Paramount combined. Right now, it's being reported that Tyler Perry is in negotiations to purchase BET, all in the same country where blacks will tell you America is designed to hold them back. Explain to me why the left hates Dave Chappelle's LGBTQ jokes. They protest against him, but they can't seem to figure out a way to cancel him. Do you know the reason why they can't cancel him? The answer is capitalism. That's why. I swear I need to get some t-shirts that says, "What can capitalism do for you?" Quit playing with me. There ain't a socialist economic system on this planet that can hold a candle to what you can accomplish when you get individuals to vote for you with their dollar. That is capitalism. Be sure you stick around for our next podcast, Does Good and Evil Exist? Because some of you are expecting to see horns on people's heads. One of my favorite historians is Dinesh D'Souza. He has such a simple quote about capitalism. There's a lot to unpack in this little quote, but we'll save that for another day. Some critics accuse capitalism of being a selfish system, but the selfishness is not in capitalism, it is in human nature. I'm Rob Lett, and I approve this message.